Welcome to Parsha Toldot. When I was preparing for this week, and really since I've been preparing since the beginning of our Parsha classes and when I speak in shul, this year I've been trying to focus on a supporting character. So I spoke specifically about supporting characters on Shabbat and sort of the role that they play, which is very important in addition to the main character. So we looked at Yishmael. Last week I looked at Abraham's servant Eliezer. So this week Toldot is really Yitzchak's Parsha. He doesn't get a lot of airtime to start. And this is about Toldot Yitzchak. It's about the story of the things he accomplishes and of his children and their lives leading up to the bracha swap between Yaakov and Esav. And as tempted as I am to talk about Yitzchak, I love Yitzchak, I decided we would look at Esav instead, because I think Esav is a supporting character in a lot of ways. And he's a really interesting character to look at. And I think that he sometimes, I think one of the benefits of the supporting characters is they're a little bit easier to identify with. It's like hard to imagine being Abraham. Abraham is so much and so great, but it's a little bit easier to imagine being his servant Eliezer supporting Abraham, right? So I think sometimes it's easier to imagine in that way, like being Esav instead of being Yitzchak. I think there's a lot to uncover there. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And okay. Very good. This shir is very heavily based on a wonderful Parsha blog by Rabbi David Kasher, who's a Chovevei graduate like Rav Ari, and he lives on the West Coast. And he wrote for a few years a beautiful Parsha blog. And he talked about Esav here as well. Often I get some inspiration. This was very, very heavily based on his, to give him proper credit as well. And he opens his blog with a question. He says, we know that Esav's nickname is Edom, which like translates loosely as to the red one. And he says, but it's interesting to see where we learn about the nickname. So I'm going to read these psukim all together, sort of English and Hebrew. And at the end, I wonder if you would tell me where you think his nickname belongs. Right, so this is we already had Rivka and Yitzchak praying for children, and Rivka feels the twins moving inside her, right, running after each other, and now they come out. So v'yetze harishon admoni, the first one comes out all red, kulo ka'aderet se'ar, and he's all covered with hair, v'yikru shmo Esav, and so they named him Esav. Akev Esav. The next after that came out his brother holding onto the heel of Esav, Vikrashmo Yaakov. So they named him Yaakov. Yitzchak ben Shishim Shana be'oledet otam. And Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. V'yigdalu hanaharim v'hi Esav ish yodei tzayid. When the boys grew up, Esav became a skillful hunter, ish sadah, a man of the field. V'Yaakov ish tam, and Yaakov was a mild man, perhaps a simple man, Yoshev ohalim, who stayed in the tents, who sat in tents. V'yahab Yitzchak et Esav, Yitzchak loved Esav, ki tzayid b'fiv, because he had a taste for game, perhaps. V'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov, and Rivka loved Yaakov. Vayazed Yaakov Nazid. Once when Yaakov was cooking a stew, v'yavo Esav min hasadeh, and Esav came in from the field, v'hu ayef, and he was famished. Vayomer Esav el Yaakov, hal iteni na min ha'adom hazeh. Give me some of that red stuff, ki ayef, because I am famished, anochi. Al kain krashmo Edom, and that is why he was called Edom. So where would you put that nickname? Would you leave it where it is, or would you put it somewhere else in that paragraph?
I mean, you could put it the part where it says, when he emerged from the womb, he was all red. You could put it after that, right? That would be kind of logical in a way, right?
I think so. I think that's an excellent answer, Anna. Right, that when we know that he was already Admoni, right at the beginning, it's interesting, right? The way that the English translates it, Vayikru Shmo Esav, you almost expect that it will say, so they named him Edom. Right? Yaakov comes from Akev. Esav does not come from Admoni or Se'ar, right? And so I think Anna's point is one that troubles a lot of the Meforshim. This feeling that his nickname belongs right at the beginning, but we don't get it until he's like an adult. And so it's hard to know if he had the nickname the whole time, or if he only gains the nickname after he asked for the ha'adom hazeh, this red lentil stew. So the Rashbam, thinking about it, right? Al kain krashmo Edom, same question, a reference to his reddish appearance at birth, right? That hu Edmoni. And so the Rashbam is saying, oh, it actually does describe his reddish appearance at birth. And what was that about? That Vinit Ava La'achol Adom. It foreshadowed that he had a craving for red-looking food. And so it's a little unclear how the Rashbam means this. Like, is there something that's particularly bad about wanting red food, right? Like apples or lentil stew. Of course, he mentions, right, that Machar Bechoroto, that he sold his birthright for this stew. And then he does explain that in his opinion, that this is sort of a insulting or derogatory term. So yeah, maybe it does go back to birth, but it seems to the Rashbam like there's something insulting or derogatory about him being willing to sell his birthright for red food. And so that's why he gets the nickname then. So even if it does sort of go back to birth, it's really about his choice at that moment. Right? And I think that the Kli Yakar actually explains it a little bit better, right? He says the reason that he was not called the red one immediately when he was born, even though Vayatze Harishon Edmoni, he emerged all red, is that this was nothing new under the sun. For many children are born reddish color, right? It's interesting to think, I don't know if the Kli Yakar had a lot of children or maybe his wife was a midwife, but he understood that sometimes babies come out a slightly different color than they end up turning out, right? And so it seems like maybe he's saying, like, it seems as though being red is not something you want to be. And so they were hoping that the Esav's red color was sort of temporary and not part of his nature, whatever it means to be red. I meant to ask at the beginning, and I forgot, is like, if you could say the color you felt you were at this moment. You know, we sort of talk about things in colors. Oh, I feel blue today is right. I feel sad, right? Red, I saw red, I felt angry. Seeing green, to be jealous, right? There are a lot of different colors that we sort of associate with emotions. And so it seems like you don't want to have the red emotion or the red coloring. And so they hoped it wouldn't stick. They didn't want to call attention to it. But once he said, give me this ha'adom hazeh, at that point, they wondered, why didn't he say, give me some lentil stew, please? Why did he say ha'adom hazeh? It was elavadai shegala da'ato shelo haya mitzaveh alehem mitzad atzmo. Right? That he was revealing his true nature, that he was drawn to redness because of the strength of the red thing inside of him. And so he was drawn to something that was of his own temperament. And that's why he was called the red one, because it was until that moment that they were sort of holding out hope that he wouldn't feel red, he would feel some other color. And here he displayed that he really does. And then the Kli Yakar says the most crazy thing, which we'll look at in full where it comes from in the Gemara. He says, Ki azne da be'emet shetavu aduma, right? That red was his nature. V'hu yoshev tachat mazal ma'adayim. Which if you saw the flyer, now you know why Mars was on the flyer, that he was born under the sign of Mars. V'al shem hayoto gavra ashad dama, that he would become a man who spilled blood. So it seems like the Kli Yakar, quoting the rabbis of the Gemara, believe that if you're born under the sign of Mars, like an astrological phenomena, that you will be someone who is inclined to or does murder in some way, spill blood, kill people or things or animals. So I don't know what others think about that. That was like a big shock when I remember learning this this daf of Gemara, because it is part of the daf yomi that we've done already. And there's a whole page about if you're born under Jupiter, you're this kind of person. If you're born under this sign, you're that kind of person. And I think most people don't feel like the mazalot are sort of a Jewish perspective on character, but it seems to be very much so that is true. So I guess I'll pause for a second if anyone has a thought on that. It is sort of a crazy idea.
No, I agree with the Kli Yakar and what you were saying. That redness implies a violent temperament, a warlike attitude. Mars being red, Mars being the god of war, etc., or the planet of war, as opposed to comfort food. Usually comfort food are things that suit you, that are peaceful, and they are usually things, lots of milk. I think mothers,
macaroni and cheese, yeah,
nourishment are comforting, macaroni cheese, things like that. So this is would be the opposite. Passion, violence, blood, all those things. So I go with the Kli Yakar.
That's so interesting. So I love that you mentioned war, because we'll see that come up later as well.
I thought that as Jewish people, we don't believe in the astrological, the planets and all that. I thought that's not part of our religion.
So I agree with both of you, right? Meaning, I think that Nelson is right, that this sort of like being red, feeling red is sort of warlike and aggressive, and it is displayed in the way that Asaph is talking here. And I think it's interesting that we associate it with Mars, because that's my feeling too, is that we don't generally talk about like astrological signs or being born under certain planets, but at this moment in Masechet Shabbat, they very much do, and that's what the Kli Yakar is referring to. And when they talk about being born under this influence of Mars, right, which I agree feels sort of foreign and not very Jewish, what Rav Ashi says, right, is iumna, ganava, tabacha, mahola, that he will either be a bloodletter or a thief, or a slaughterer of animals, or a circumciser, right? And so I think, what is he saying there, right? A bloodletter being like a killer, or a thief. So those are like the bad red occupations. Or you could be a slaughterer of animals, a tabacha, right? Someone who kills animals like in a kosher way, or a circumciser, a mahola, right? Maybe the better ones. It's almost like, I think a modern example, I don't know if any of you watched the TV show Dexter when it came out. It was a detective mystery show, and it was about the main character. My husband and I watched, I think, maybe a few seasons of it. The main character was a murderer. He was a serial killer, like by night, and by day he was a CSI blood spatter expert. Right. And the premise was that because he was a murderer, he had all these amazing insights when he went to crime scenes, because he sort of understood the inclination, right? So Dexter, of course, is both, which is not good. But like, if you could imagine Dexter giving up his murdering tendencies just to be the CSI expert, right? I think what Rav Ashi is saying is you could, right? Maybe it's like you would be a surgeon, right? You something about blood and letting the blood out sort of excites you in an inappropriate way, but instead of becoming a murderer, you become a surgeon, right? And you know, there are many wonderful surgeons who are full of mitzvot, but surgeons often have like a sort of red personality, a little bit aggressive, right? Dominant. To get that far in medicine, I think maybe you have to. sort of similar characteristics, but they use them for good, for healing instead of for bad. Right. So I think that feels a little bit more Jewish to me, whether you believe about being born under the sign of Mars. Right. And then I love this sort of like, it's like you could almost imagine that Rav Ashi is teaching that, and Rabbah looks up and he says, hey, Anna b'madim havai, I was born under the sign of Mars. He's like offended, right? He's like, well, I'm not a murderer or a thief, right? And Abaye says to him, maybe I think to comfort him, Mar, master, name anesh v'katel. You punish people and you kill people as a judge. Right. So being the head of the Beit Din, Rabbah could put people to death. Right. So maybe he, they say that a bloody Beit Din put one person to death in several decades, but maybe Rabbah had sort of a desire to do it. And so that made him, being born under the influence of Mars, made him willing to apply the death penalty should it be necessary. So I think, right, I'm not sure I want to see Esav as like as a thief or a murderer, because I don't think that's the pshat of the text. But if that's sort of the way we're leaning towards seeing Esav, then this is interesting, right? Esav had a choice. He could be a good red person or a bad red person, and he chose to be a bad red person. Is sort of what I think the Kli Yakar based on this Gemara is saying. Is that I think that's what it's saying. So what? Yeah, go ahead, Nelson.
No, I'm jumping ahead. I don't remember the end. No, I don't know if this Parsha or the next one, when Jacob is coming with his family, his tents and all his property, and is about to meet Esau, and he's afraid that Esau is coming to kill him. So that's the idea one has of Esau, this warrior, passionate, aggressive. So he splits the family in two, so the one will be saved and the other may succumb. So Jacob is thinking peace, and Esau is thinking, but we have a happy end. They embrace, and Jacob sees the face of God and all that. So I think there's another corroboration of what you were saying.
Yeah, right. So I think it's two parshiot in Vayishlach, Yaakov, right? Yaakov maybe is like maybe the more peaceful one, and Esav is at least certainly perceived as being the war guy. And I think that's right. I agree with you. And luckily, Esav either is able to sort of overcome his instinct, right? Because they do have a peaceful meeting, or maybe sometimes Esav is red and sometimes he's not. I think that might be a piece of it. And the rabbis, so because you mentioned war again, the rabbis connect, in Bereshit Rabbah, they connect Esav to David HaMelech, which I think is fascinating. And I brought you these psukim up here, but we don't need to read them inside, but it's just the context for you. Right, that Shmuel saw, right? Shmuel is the Navi, and he has this prophecy that he should anoint David as the king. And so he goes to his family. Yishai is his father, and he asks to see all the kids. And they go get David from the field, and it says in the text, "V'hu admoni," and the rabbis of the Midrash say, "Uh-oh," right? "V'hu admoni." That sounds a lot like Esav. Why are we comparing David HaMelech to Esav? Right? Esav is supposed to be like the bad brother, and David HaMelech is one of the greatest kings that we have. How could they both be called admoni together? Right? And so Bereshit Rabbah says, "Don't worry." Right? They were afraid. Will he also be a murderer like Esav? Which again, I don't think there's a lot of shot proof for that for Esav, but it's fine. But Hashem says, right, that it says he was all red, but he was also bright-eyed and handsome. And so God says, no, he's red, but he's also bright-eyed. Right, and what does that mean? It means that Esav midat atzmo hu horeg. He killed out of his own desire. Right, he's the Dexter, that's the murderer. But David midat Sanhedrin hu horeg. That he would only kill on the order of the court. Right, and so right, David is a warlord, right? He leads the people in battle, and he has to kill many people. And in fact, we know that David can't build the Beit HaMikdash because he says he has blood on his hands. But even though there is sort of this like sad natural consequence that he has to wait for his son to build the Beit HaMikdash, he was killing on the order of Hashem, or the order of the Sanhedrin. And so therefore his redness played out in a sort of different way. So there's a good way to be red and there's a bad way to be red, is sort of what I hear. And I wish that Meirav and Milt were with us now, because Meirav, if you listen, I'm curious what you think about this. While I was preparing, I was thinking about the movie that's called Seeing Red. It's a movie that came out, I think, last year. It's a Disney movie. My kids have watched it, and I imagine Meirav might have watched it. It's a coming of age story about a little girl, an Asian child, who discovers when she turns 13 that the women in her family have a red panda inside of them. And it's sort of, it's like the uncontrollable emotion, anger, fear, excitement, and the panda will come out. And so the women are uncomfortable having this panda. And so they capture the panda, each one of them, in a little piece of jewelry that they wear with them. So the panda's there, but it's locked away. You cannot access it. And through the course of the story, I'm going to spoil it. I hope that's okay. It's a beautiful movie anyway. I hope you'll watch it. May, the young girl, decides that she wants to keep her panda. She doesn't feel comfortable sending her panda into like a heart locket that she wears around her neck. And I think that the point of the movie is that sometimes seeing red is okay. It's natural. It's human, right? We know that David actually made some very poor choices in his life. Moments where maybe he saw green, right? He wanted Bathsheba, or he saw red, right? He sends Bathsheba's first husband out to war so he can take the newly widowed woman. But that's a part of being a person, is sometimes seeing red, whether you're born under Mars or not. But that it's not inherent in you what choices you will make with your panda out there, with your red, right? And so that's why the Kli Yakar and the Rashba are so quick to say they didn't name him Edom at birth, because it's not whether you have red in you, it's what you choose to do with your red once it's out, right?
If you can control it, if you can control the red.
Yes, and that's a really hard thing, right? And that, it's sort of comical the way they portray it in this movie, but that's a very hard thing to do. It's hard for David to do, it's hard for Esav to do, and I would argue it's hard for all of us, right? I think another interesting word that comes from the Shoresh, Aleph Daled Mem, right? Edom, is Adam, is human. Right, which is to say that maybe all of us have like a little bit of Adam in us, right? So if we go back all the way to the beginning of the Parsha, V'yitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam, right? God formed the person Adam min afar min ha'adamah, from the dust of the earth. And so Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch has this sort of wild explanation here. He says that Adam, and I don't know if the science is true, we'll have to find someone who can verify it. Milashon Adom, right? It comes from the language of red. Hatzeva shekeren oro nishbara pachot mishar karnei hatzvaim. So again, I don't know if this is true, but the Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch is asserting that the red is the ray of light that is least broken of all the colors of the spectrum. Right, like I guess, right, we're excluding black and white. So red is like the least light distorts it, I suppose, right? And so he says, what is that analogy? Zot omeret ha'adam adom hu gilui elokim hayashir yashar biyoter hanimtza ba'olam. That the human being, the red one, is the most direct revelation of God on earth. We're like the purest ray of light that comes from God, not broken, not diluted in any way. And I think that at some point, and right, like May, the the little girl who decides to keep her panda, that there's something valuable to being red, right? David HaMelech maybe is who he is because he has that redness, that he's able to sort of manage and navigate in some way. There's something pure about it. There's something unfiltered, right? The most direct revelation of God is there. And thinking about Bereshit, if you see the two psukim that come in Bereshit and Perek Tet, is sort of both sides maybe of this thing, right? I think I didn't put the English in here for the first pasuk, right? Shofech dam ha'adam, ba'adam damo yishafech. That if you murder someone, right? If you kill someone, that your own blood should be spilled. Ki b'tzelem Elokim asa et ha'adam va'atem pru urvu shiritzu ba'aretz urevu ba. Right? That our mission is to be fruitful and multiply and abound on the earth, right? And so I think that's like the two poles, right? You could be a murderer if you see red, if you are an Adam, if you are a Dome, or you could be fruitful and multiply and create more beautiful things that live and inhabit the earth. And so in Esav, maybe we see sort of what happens when you swing too far to the shofech dam ha'adam, right? When you're not able to control that Edom piece of you, right? Because why is he called Edom? Maybe even more, although I like that idea of comfort food, Nelson, right? Maybe even more than about the food is that, like, he comes, you picture this guy running up to the tent and being like, I need to eat right now, right? When my kids say that, I say, take a deep breath, go sit down at the table, like we're gonna eat like menches, right? And Esav is sort of all of that like fiery passion. He's not able to control it in any way. And that David HaMelech might also have that Edboni character, but he finds a way to channel it, right? I don't think you could be king without it. Like you need a little bit of aggression, right? Just like a surgeon, you need a little bit of that fierceness. The wars, right? We say that the wars we fought under David's time were justified, that they were holy wars, right? To be the leader of a war, you need a little bit of it. If you have too much, you become, a war criminal. And so it's a very fine line. And I imagine that in the heat of a battle, it's very hard to walk the appropriate side of that line. And so you need someone who's Adboni, who's used to navigating their redness or their panda, their murderous inclination. Otherwise, you might lose control altogether, like Esav. So I think that Esav is interesting as a supporting character because there's something hard and very relatable about his character. To be a Tam Yoshev Ohalim might be hard, and maybe that's not for everybody, but I think everyone has that struggle that Esav has, and our challenge is to come out on the King David side, and that's what's so interesting about Esav. But I think I cut someone off. Was someone about to say something?
Yeah, it's interesting, Yael. So I just Googled the strongest colors on the spectrum, and I don't know how the rabbis knew this, but red has the lowest energy on the spectrum. So what was it, Rabba, who said that the red light is broken up?
That's Shimshon Raval Hirsch. So it does feel like perhaps he's a rather modern, relatively commentator, but still, amazing that he knew that.
So scientifically, red is broken up. It has the least energy. And babies are often born a different color than the parents had expected, which causes some anxiety. That I've worked in nurseries, and that does cause some anxiety. That a baby's color emerges gradually after birth.
Yes, that's true. They could change, right? The color definitely could change.
Right. And if we think of that as like an inspirational message rather than just some kind of like funny scientific fluke, right? Then there is something very powerful there. Like you can be born red under the mazal of Adom, but you don't have to be a murderer, right? You don't have to give in to that sort of inclination. Your body might change. You can sort of figure out how to harness that energy. And in some ways, I think, like at first I thought, oh, it must be very unlucky to be born under a dome, right? Like I wouldn't want to be born there. And then you sort of find out David HaMelech was that thing. And you're like, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad, right? Maybe there's something good about people born then.
Mhm.
I can't imagine being a Moel, but we need Moels, right?
Exactly.
So if Esau was born under the sign of Mars, why wasn't Yaakov? They were twins.
That is a great question.
Why were they so opposite? One was
Wow.
just opposite, totally opposite in temperament.
Yeah. So, sometimes you have siblings that are different. I would say my sister and I have almost opposite temperaments. She is loud where I am quieter. She is artistic where I am like more bookish, but
Okay.
she's angry when I don't always get so angry. But she's not my twin. That's a great question, Bobby. I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna have to look into that. You would think they would be born under the same mazal. Although, I had lunch with Ariel Vogel on Shabbat, and she has twins. And someone asked which twin was older, and her little girl said the other one by 5 minutes. And she said, some twins are born on different days, not just like 11 o'clock at night and 12:30, the next day. But sometimes, like if God forbid one twin comes too early, sometimes they try to delay even for a day or two to get more medicine into the twin that's still in utero before he comes out too. So it could, in theory, I could see be possible that Mars, like right on the tail end of Mars, one baby comes out and then the next. But it's a great question. And I'm surprised it didn't bother the rabbis, like the Kuyakar.
And
Oh,
you
Nelson,
also
you're muted, Nelson.
You could have identical twin boys. One is born before sunset, and the other is born after sunset. But you have their bris on 2 different days.
That would be very annoying.
2 parties.
No, I think that what this demonstrates is that the rabbis really did not believe in astrology. What they're using, the stars, the planets, is to describe a psychological temperament. So it happens that it works for Esau. It didn't work for Yaakov. But so you go with that allusion, and it's a poetical figure, poetical license, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's right, Nelson. That sounds good to me, right? That it's just a way of talking about the characteristics. And so, okay, if he was born under Mars, good, because also we don't actually know when their birthdays were, any of these people, right? Like it's interesting to imagine that Esav and David might be born in like the same season, but we don't know, right? I think that's right. And I think that it's maybe one way of sort of talking about, especially at that time, might have been sort of a normative way of talking about why people were the way they are. Because on some level, right, everyone's is born with some dominant trait inside of them. And so whether it's because of your astrological sign or because that's just your sort of chemical makeup, we don't know. But certainly to Anna's point too, right? They are very different. And Rivka knew that from the minute they were in utero, right? She says she knew there were 2 nations running inside of her, that the twins were sort of not at ease together, even inside of her body. And I think that that's hard in a family, right? I purposefully left the whole sort of story in the first text because I think it really describes such a conflicted family, right? 2 boys with 2 different interests who look really different. The parents love different ones, right? Like 2 sides, the Yitzchak Esav side and the Rivka Yaakov side. It's a family sort of destined for some kind of shake up, with this brachot, because there has been such a polarization in the family, maybe is the way I would say it. And whether that's because Esav was polarizing, right? Often a difficult child does sort of cause division in a family, or whether, Yitzchak and Rivka just couldn't get on the same page about their parenting. It's hard to know why that would happen. but it certainly feels like this was a train going in one path since the very beginning.
And it carries to the next generation.
Yeah.
Mhm. It
Yeah.
continues to this day.
Yes, I think that's right. There's a beautiful book in the Magid series. It's the Koran, companions to different books of Tanakh. Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Grummet, he lives in Israel. He wrote the one on Breshit, which is, I think, is a very beautiful insight into Breshit. He talks about how the covenantal child, this idea that like Yitzchak, not Ishmael, Yaakov, not Esav, is perhaps not the right model, right? Because it takes one more family, and that family does not have a covenantal child. It's a covenantal family. And so I don't think that he's saying that Esav should have been in necessarily, but I think that he's saying it took 3 generations to get to a place where we had what God wanted, which was a family where all the children were covenantal, right? Not just the one. And that's a powerful thing to say, right? That the ideal was not to pick one child. The ideal was to welcome all the children.
What family was that?
Well, so with Yaakov, right, all of his children become the 12 tribes.
Yeah, but they don't all get together. They
don't all get along.
They don't
That
get
is
along.
totally true.
Family is a bit dysfunctional in many ways. So
yes, not perfect. And I would say, I would agree with you that the fights between those brothers, I think you see echo through the generations as well. Look, family is not easy. Maybe this is a perfect pre-Thanksgiving class, right? When you get together with all your lovely children and cousins and siblings, right? It's hard. Family can be hard, and it can be especially hard when there's someone who's admoni in your family. But to remember that we all are covenantal in some way at this point. Hard to know about Esav, but I wish that we all feel many happy colors over the coming days, yellows and beautiful colors. And if we do feel reds, we're able to channel them in the appropriate ways and learn from Esav's mistakes at the very least.
And I think when we think of red right now, we should think of cranberries.
That's like an interesting Rorschach test. When you bring out the cranberries, do people say, "Oh, beautiful cranberries," or "Give me that Adom ha'adom hazeh"? Well, I hope everyone has delicious cranberries.
Thank you, Yael. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, guys. This was wonderful. And have a Shabbat Shalom. And
Thank you.
see you next time.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And a good
Yom
job.
HaHodu. They call it Yom HaHodu, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so close to Hallel, Chodesh Tov, almost 2 days away.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good job.
Bye, guys. Good night.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.